Welcome back, lovers and haters of Java. So what we're going to do today, we are going to look at data types today. So we're going to be thinking about different types of data. So ints, strings, chars, boolean, doubles, that sort of thing, and what we can do with them, what they are, how to get them to print out in the console, etc. So standard procedure, we're going to go to File, hit Java Project. I'm going to call mine data types, making sure to conform to camel case convention. Going to hit Finish, select Standard, Class, and then data types again. Clicking on that. First thing I'm going to do is comment in here. So this is a Java program about data types. Now I'm going to start adding some authors and versions as well. So I'm going to add author, Scott, and at version v1. It's good practice to try and have a version number on there. It just shows other people how many iterations of this particular program there are. So this is number 1. That always appears. I'm going to delete that. And we are ready to code. So the first data type we're going to look at is probably the one that you're going to encounter the most, which is an integer. So an integer is a whole number. So an integer could be 4, it could be 45, it could be 841, it could be 19,523, it could be anything. Anything that's not got a decimal point. We have data types for decimal points, but for now, these must be whole numbers. So how do we write one of these? Okay, well, int is how we declare the data type. So int is short for integer, of course. Now what we're doing here is creating a variable. Now a variable is simply a box in which holds a value. So I want to create a box that contains an integer and then put an integer value within the box. So I'm going to start by making the box. So we know it wants to be an integer, and I'm going to call the box my integer. Then again, we've got camel case, so that's every other word is capitalized. Now for now, I'm going to put a little semicolon there. Now what we've done there is basically declared an integer called my integer. Okay. Step 1, complete. So next what we're going to do is we're going to take our box, we're going to open it up, and we're going to throw in a value. So we need to select what box. I mean, there might be many boxes, so I'm going to just define the box I want, so my integer, and then I'm going to put equals, and let's go for 7. So there we go. Now this stage is called initialization. So we've initialized the variable my integer with the value of 7. Okay, now the reason we've got a little warning triangle here is because we haven't actually done anything with this variable. At the moment it's just sitting there, it's not being used. So I'm going to use it by printing it out. So I'm going to go for system.out.print. In parenthesis, I'm going to, instead of putting something like hello world this time, which will print hello world, I'm going to ditch these speech marks and just put the variable name, so my integer like that. So what will happen here is this print statement will look for the variable my integer, it'll find it here, it'll realize it's an integer, it'll then notice that it's initialized with the value of 7, and it'll print out 7 down here. So let's try it. Run, and there's the 7. Fantastic. Now, there is another stage to variables. The reason we have a variable is because we can change it. We want to change it. When you vary something, you change it. So it might begin as 7, but later on in your program, it might, say, become 12 or 16, whatever it is. Now, this stage is not called declaration, it's not called initialization, it's called assignment. So if you've already given the variable a value, that's initializing. If you're changing the value, that's assignment. So I'm going to type in my integer to select the correct metaphorical box, and then put equal to, say, 12. There we go. So this is your assignment stage. There we go. So if I print that out again now, system.out.print my integer, you will notice what happens. Let's put the ln's in so we get them on separate lines. Run them. So you have 7, which is the initial value of my integer at that point. And then when it's assigned with the value of 12, the variable my integer changes to 12 and it'll get printed out there. So you can see that can just continually happen throughout your program. It's useful for a whole bunch of things, but they're essentially the core of most of your programs, is these changing variables. Right, so that's an integer then. We could go and add some integers together. So if I create another integer, I'm going to call it int another integer. And this time, instead of declaring it on one line of code and initializing it in a second line of code, I'm going to put it all in one line. So I'm going to declare there and then initialize directly afterwards. So you're going to put int another integer equals, and I'm going to go for 18. So that is declaring and initializing on the same line. It's kind of like shorthand, sort of. Right, I'm going to get rid of that just for now, so we don't get confused. But essentially we've got two integers now, one called my integer, which is set to a value of 7, and one called another integer, which is initialized to a value of 18. So I'm going to try and add them together. So we go to system.out.print ln, and then I'm going to add them together. So my integer plus, so I have the plus operator, and then another integer. Now Java's clever, Eclipse is clever. What it'll do is it'll look at the value of that, which we know is 7. It'll look at the value of that, which we know is 18. It'll add them together and give us a result on screen. And there it is. Now there might be a point where you don't want them to be added together, you just want them to be placed side by side. You can do that by adding a couple of speech marks there with a space in between. Now this is essentially a string, which is something we're going to look at in a moment, but you'll see what happens now. So we'll do that. You'll have a 7, you'll have a printed space, and then you'll have an 18, which is, of course, another integer, the value. Great, so that's the integer. Let's look at doubles. Now doubles are simply decimals. So they're not whole numbers like 3 or 4. They are decimals. It could be 7.5, could be 8.543, 87.543, whatever we want, really. But they're set up in very much the same way. So you declare them using the correct data type and initialize them. So I'm going to use the shorthand method here to do this. So I'm going to type in double and then give it an appropriate name. So my double, and then set it to a value of 6.3, semicolon. So that semicolon always goes again on the end of our instructions to show that it's the end of that particular statement. Just to check it works, let's try and print it out. Okay, so it's looking for the variable my double, looks up here, realizes that it's a double, and realizes that it's initialized with the value 6.3. Going to run it, and there it is. So that's our double. Let's move on to Boolean. So Boolean is something you'll have encountered within your logic gate work before. Now a Boolean can only have two possible outputs, outcomes. Whereas, you know, an integer could have, well, it's got an infinite number, hasn't it? And so has pretty much doubles. But Boolean has only true or false. That's it, just the two. So to set up a Boolean, type Boolean, give it a name, my bool. Well, we usually abbreviate Boolean to bool in code, and we're going to set it to the value of true. There we go. Same old story. Let's try and print it out. In the parenthesis, we'll put my bool, and it should give us true. Fabulous. So we've done integers, the whole numbers. We've done doubles, which are decimals, and we've done Boolean, which can either be true or false. Now, Boolean will be something that we'll be looking at in detail when we're checking out if statements and loop. That's just what it is. Let's look at some character-based stuff now. So we want to be able to print out letters, and we want to be able to print out words. So let's start with letter. Now a letter is a character, and what's short for a character? Char. So let's go for char, my char. I'm going to set it to, and I want to print out just a single T. So I can't just put T like that. Because if I just put T like that, then it's going to think that T is a variable somewhere. It's going to think there's a box called T. So we need to give it some symbols to show that it is a char. And that symbol is this apostrophe here. Okay, so we're going to have apostrophe, T, and then apostrophe. Print that out. My chart, and it'll appear in the console. Now it won't appear with the apostrophes, of course, it'll just be a T on there. Now what we've looked at so far, these are all called primitive data types. So primitive data types can't be broken down into anything smaller. So a whole number is a whole number. How can you break down a whole number anymore? You can't really. But there are non-primitive data types which are a bit more complex. These are essentially things that are made up of smaller things. One we're going to look at today is called a string. Now a string is essentially a series of characters put together. So that could be a word, it could be a sentence, it could be a paragraph. But basically they are made up of lots of chars and lots of different symbols. So I'm going to try to make some. I'm going to put string, my string, and I'm going to put equals and set it to hello world. Semicolon on the end. Now subtly, and a bit annoyingly, I'll be honest, within Eclipse, I think Java more widely, is that string is capitalized, whereas char, boolean, double, int, whatever else isn't. So it's just, you just got to be aware of that. So when you're writing a string, when you're initializing it, you must make sure that you're using speech marks here. So if you think of words and sentences and then speech, you can see how the two align. Let's print it out. System.out.print line, and then in our parenthesis put my string. And oh behold, there we go. There is our string there. So just to recap, we've covered variables, the different stages of creating a variable. So declaring essentially a box with a particular data type. So this one is a whole number called my integer, and then initializing it, or basically putting in a value of 7 there. So those are integers. We looked at doubles, which are decimal numbers. We've looked at Boolean, which resolves either true or false. More on that later. We have looked at chars, which are simple characters. I mean, you can put anything in there like that. It doesn't have to be a letter, it could be any old character. And we've looked at strings, which are non-primitive data types, which are made up of lots of chars, and are words or sentences or paragraphs or whole books, whatever it is. And that's data types for now. Bye.